Good afternoon, a warm welcome from Vienna. We will wait, I think, 2 more minutes before we start today's webinar. There will be some more people coming. Okay. Good afternoon. Again, a warm welcome to all our participants from the side of Vienna and our today's speakers team. Welcome to the webinar, Co-Creating the University of the Future. My name is Barbara. I'm working at the Institute for Managing Sustainability at Vienna University of Economics and Business. And together with the head of our institute, Andre Martinuzzi. Hello, Andre. We host this webinar series and we will guide you through this session today. The webinar is a collaboration today with FernUniversität in Hagen, Warwick Business School and Vienna University of Economics and Business. We are happy that again so many experts followed our invitation. We have a very international audience again, 5 different continents and more than 20 different countries. So welcome from all over the world. Let me say some introductory words. Why this webinar? Some of you already know this series, and since COVID-19, higher education institutions were faced with new challenges. However, the pandemic may also create opportunities for universities to co-create their future. That's why we are very curious about today's topic. We conduct this series of webinars since spring 2020. We try to provide a vibrant expert forum for sharing insights, for exchange of best practices, and for knowledge transfer within the EU-funded project Living Innovation. Next slide, please. 4 webinars already took place on experience-based learning, on humor in distance teaching, on gaming and VR, and on motivation. I think some of today's participants already were already with us in a previous webinar. If you're interested to review these webinars, you can all find them online on living-innovation.com. And in this 5th webinar today, we want to take stock on how to lead European universities from COVID-19 emergency teaching to a long-term education strategy. And before Andre will introduce today's wonderful speakers, let me say some rules. Next slide, please. So please use the chat function for questions anytime. We will have about 20 to 30 minutes for Q&A at the end of this session, and we will try to summarize your questions. And please mute yourself unless you speak. I also want to point out that the webinar is recorded and it's also live streamed via YouTube. So if you want to participate, but you don't want to be seen, please switch off your camera. Before we jump into the topic, next slide, please. Let me ask a short introductory question. We would like to know, what do you associate with the University of the Future? Please post in the chat forum now your associations to jump into this topic. Okay. Community, the future is unwritten, interaction, online, offline, innovation and flexibility, new teaching and learning methods, intercultural and integrated, innovative ecosystems, cross-disciplinary, sustainability-driven, very good, blended learning, augmented and virtual reality. A lot of great associations, and I'm sure many of those aspects, or at least some, will be addressed by today's speakers. And yeah, I'm very curious about their inputs, and also I'm very looking forward to the discussion at the end of this session. Thank you for your contributions. And yes, next slide, please. Before I hand over to Andre, please take a look at the agenda. We have Ada Pellert from FernUniversität in Hagen, Oliver Vettori from Vienna University of Economics and Business, and Pietro Micheli from Warwick Business School. And they will explore together with us the change process, the ongoing change process in higher education. Please feel free to ask questions, and Andre, the floor is yours. You will give some more insights and background where this webinar is.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, good afternoon if you're from Europe. Good morning, Canada. Good morning, Mexico. Good morning, Atlanta. You got up so early in the morning that you made it to our webinar. This is why we run it at this time, because we thought it's a good time slot for European, for our friends in the US, and even for colleagues from Asia. So for the last two webinars, we also had some participants from India, and for them it was quite late in the evening. So this is why we run it right now. We run it in the course of a European project that I have the pleasure to coordinate now for the last 3 years. And this European project is about responsible innovation. This is the broader context. So within responsible innovation, smart homes. Within smart homes, there is smart distant teaching, distant learning, and this is why we are here today. But the broader context is about how can we co-create, how can we co-design the future that we want. And this is the basic idea of responsible innovation. It's about responsibility, and it's about responsibility for impacts. It's about taking care what impacts our innovations will have in the future. And it means about innovating with a purpose. So it's not just innovating because we are so super curious about the technology. It's not about being addicted to any kind of VR device or whatever, holograms or whatever. It's about innovating with a purpose. The second big element about responsible innovation is that it's with the people and for the people. So it's about responsibility towards certain stakeholders, and it's about innovating together with the people. So it's not about designing something in a lab, something very distant to people or in the ivory tower of a university. It's about co-creating together the future that we want. And this is also about the university. How can we co-create, co-design, co-develop, and co-implement the university that we want in the future? And the third big element is about the systems. It's about the responsibility within systems. It's a responsibility that is a shared responsibility, that not one technical developer, one device developer can design, but we can do it just together, and we do not just we design whole systems. And universities are systems embedded in systems and consisting of systems. And I think dancing with systems, as Donella Meadows put it many years ago, this is the main challenge. We have to dance with systems. Universities might be perceived as quite difficult systems. And the question is how to dance with them. And this will be also today in the focus of our presentations. So if we can go a few slides forward. Yeah, the next. This was just a little bit of color playing. Yes. Our three speakers today. Ada Pellert, thank you that you're here. You're Chancellor of FernUniversität Hagen. Well, if you don't know FernUniversität Hagen, you should know. We know them for many, many years because it's one of the, well, I think it's one of the biggest institutions for distance learning, at least that I know, founded in the mid-1970s. 10,000 of students. So I just saw on your webpage, I think it's about 80,000, but please correct me if I'm wrong. So they have a very, very, very long track record in distance learning, perhaps a different kind of distance learning as we practice it now during the COVID crisis, because it's long tradition and distance learning meant something different 10 years ago than it might mean today. So I'm very curious today to learn more about how FernUniversität Hagen was prepared for this, what they experienced during the last year, and what they will learn out of that. They even put together a manifesto that Ada Pellert will present today, and we will see which kind of directions for the future university that we want she has in mind. Then our second speaker is Oliver Vettori, colleague from my own university. If you don't know Vienna University of Economics and Business, well, actually, it's huge. It's not huge just by building, it's also huge by the number of students. About 25,000 students study at Vienna University of Economics and Business. They all try to know how to make money and how to create growth and welfare and benefit for all and for themselves. And with these 25,000 students, we also have some kind of experiences with e-learning. VU created its own e-learning system many years ago. We even have a public learning system. So we do not just target our own students, we target nearly everybody. So, and Oliver will talk about his idea, what will remain, what will be new roles, what is about teaching and learning and teaching. And then we have Pietro Micheli. He's professor at business performance and innovation at Warwick Business School. Well, perhaps you know Warwick Business School. They were ranked #1 by Financial Times for their distance learning MBA. So also that's something which is very interesting for us to learn, how you not just simply develop something which is an on learning course, but how you make it on the first rank of Financial Times. And he will join us today as well. So these are the three speakers. What are the guiding questions that we put into the focus of today? Well, actually, it's about the new roles for us, the new roles for university, the rethinking. Well, how will it look like in the future? What can we learn out of this state of emergency? What will be the new normal? And yeah, we will see what our three speakers have in mind. So without any further ado, Ada, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Andre. I will share now my screen. And I'm very happy to be here, I have to say. I'm only unhappy that I missed this lecture on humor in distance education. So that sounded really interesting, and I hope there's some record on that, because I think we all need that. However the future it will be a better one with a lot of humor. Yes, I bring some thoughts on the future of universities. And I think, first of all, each institution has to think about its mission. Only when we know who we are, we find an adequate approach to the future. And this has to be transformed into a strategy in universities, into a strategy of teaching, research, service, management. I stress that point because it's the weak point of universities. They are not very good at defining joint and missions and shared strategies. Let's come to our topic, digitization. I mean, this really is a challenge to the business model of universities. It challenges research, of course. It attacks this core function of universities because of open access, big data, algorithmicity. So we can do a lot more, and each discipline has to think and rethink, what does this mean for my core of knowledge? So I think all the content is really challenged by digitization. And of course, teaching it's more visible. We can compare. Didactics have to change. We have to rethink our educational missions, what competencies are needed in a digital world. And if we still want to be a site of discourse, and this is my vision of a university, we have to position ourselves in the environment of the digital 21st century. So we also have new types of customer relationships. I mean, the students are much more kind of co-producers nowadays. They are more confident consumers because they can compare. Remember, visibility of teaching. In former times, teaching was something private, intimate. Now it's public, you can compare. So you have changed learning and reception habits. And one has to think about controlling a learning process with a lot of guidance. And the teachers, I think it was mentioned in the chat before, of course, the roles will change with all those formats. And I hope that we define our own role as professors, not only via content producing, but also at the design of learning arrangements. And this is also part of the scholarship. I think the role of higher education institutions will be stressed more in terms of quality assurance. If we don't have to produce all the contents ourselves, but our own quality assurance has to give us confidence whether this is a content we want to have in our curriculum. But then we have more permeability between educational sectors. And we, of course, need a lifelong orientation. So that's a lifespan event. And we need partner networks to be a partner for students in different phases of their life. And of course, a university is a site of reflection. So now I come more to the learning and teaching function of university. I would like to stress that tonight. Are we positioned adequately to enable learning in such an environment? Look at this, 18th century, scholars at a lecture. Look at this, 1947. Not such a big difference, is it? I mean, there were centuries in between. And maybe if you go around the corner, you find a similar situation nowadays. So I think we have to rethink how, what, where, with whom, and when we learn. So that's the challenge of digitization, and we should use this opportunity. How do we learn? I think there's now such a possibility to make learning much more flexible and individual, learning independently of time and place. Andre Martinuzzi stressed the point that my institution was set up 50 years ago exactly for that purpose. Organizing studies independent of time and space. So we had to think, how can we reach a learner that is not around? Then the media changed in these various years. It was a lot of paper, it's more social media nowadays, but it's a mix of media, but you need to come to the learner. So we can use new teaching formats. You have all made some experience with those new examination formats. But I think the interesting nowadays is that we have much more opportunity for collaboration and network and personalization. So let's reflect what we learn. There's a lot of talk on new work. We all know digitization means a social transformation process that is a really big one. We need a lot of new competencies. We know that our societies are lacking certain competencies while they're needing new ones. So how do we get these new work opportunities? Only via new learning. And what is this kind of new learning? I think we have to come to the learner, put the learner in the center wherever he or she is, connect different spaces of learning, far beyond formal educational institutions. So the learning has to come to the learner, and it's a lifelong endeavor. So, and it will be participative. People must be involved. If I'm 35 years old, I have a degree, I'm not convinced by just degrees. I have to be involved by my interests. So talking about new work, we all know we need a lot of transformative technology experts. Yeah, that's all over. You see it up in the upper part. We need key digital qualification. But I would like to stress we also need a lot of non-digital qualification, very old-fashioned, good old university values like analytical thinking, problem solving, discursive competencies. So we will need that much more because the rest can be handed over to machines. And so how do we get the learner? Only by his or her interests. So, and the new media give us so much more possibilities to find this flexible, personal learning path. So look how we can learn. We can learn in virtual classrooms. We can have hybrid learning. I think the future will be a kind of blended out of this. I think quality evolves when we really think what kind of content in what kind of format. Then the quality starts. So we have a conversion of public spaces, social media, gamification. So we have a lot of ways to bring good learning to the learner. I think pedagogues 200 years ago would have tears in their eyes with those opportunities that we have nowadays, only if we connect them for good learning. So let's reflect with whom that changes. We are learning a lifelong, and we're learning on different places with different people. And we learn, it changes also when we learn. So I said it is a kind of space and time independent learning, and it will be lifelong learning. So outcome, competence, orientation, and support of participation and access. I think I have to stress that because that's in the German-speaking countries not given. So look, this is, for instance, our mix. We have synchronous, asynchronous possibilities of media support, and you can mix this. But first you have to think, okay, what is good learning and how do I get to my learner? And then after this, you start to think what kind of media support is the correct one. So for me, digitization is a social process that can transform rigid structures, challenge our traditional understanding of education. It makes it much more transparent, more individual, more collaborative. It was mentioned also in the chat, it changes the roles of teachers. And that's why, and that's my end, I promise to keep sharp the time limit. We put that all together in a so-called manifesto to new learning. We put it all together with a lot of colleagues into 12 theses on what we think is good learning. I mean, it's more catchy to talk about new learning, but a lot of these is said by many good pedagogics 200 years ago as well. But I think we have to be very straight what kind of learning is needed in this societal environment we are in, and then say, okay, what's my mission as an institution and what do I want to stress? So if you want, I won't go through this now. You can have a look at the website, of course. A lot of people sign this. It's more a manifesto. It's an occasion to get into communication. It's not a scientific article, but it's a way of let's talk about good and new learning. And that's what I'm strictly convinced about, that only if we start with that question, we will have a quality improvement in higher education. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I stop now my screen and come back to the nice photos of all of you.
Thank you very much. You were even faster than the
I promise.
15 minutes, super. This gives me enough time to ask you one or two questions. The manifesto, what can I do with this manifesto? What's the purpose of this manifesto and what shall I do with it? So it's nice, I should read it, I think, but then what to do with it?
So I think we had two ideas in mind to build up a network of people interested in good learning, and all those that are now have tried out a lot of new things, but are afraid that if we don't come to the core of it all, this will be all gone. So it was a kind of shaking hands and networks between those who said, yes, we want to go into that direction. And I think you can do two things. It could help in the political dialogue in educational policy area to say, hey, concentrate now on the right things and not just on platforms. And the other issue is in your institution, you could use it as a kind of framework and say, aha, are we really ready for lifelong learning? Are we really thinking about equal opportunities? Are we really accessible? How do we care about data literacy and so on and so on? So maybe that's helpful. So my main thing is that a lot of contacts evolved, and we could build up kind of network with other institutions, and I think that will help us all in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My second question is about how far has your university come in using now digital based learning? For me, the FernUniversität Hagen was always, I was always associated them with with materials, with something printed that people get and they read it. So how could you tell how far have you come in putting all of this universe to digital platforms?
This is different. We have 5 faculties and there are different learning goals and models, but I think most have embedded the materials. The students still love the materials. They are booklet. They have the impression that's my booklet and that's my library and I want that. And besides, they have to pay fees just for those booklets. But this is embedded in a learning environment where you have other media and are connected with other people. And then you have a lot, of course, of platforms and collaborative and a lot of video audiovisuals nowadays. So I think more and more this is blended in every study course. And that's for me. We also have in all over Germany, we have study centers where people can meet, just old-fashioned in presence, meet, talk, do together. And I think that's it. You need this study material for yourself. Let it be booklets, let it be visuals, whatever. You need this collaboration with others to exchange ideas and work on case studies. And of course, you need to meet from time to time. So I'm not the one saying, hey, forget, let's do it all online. And I really hope, and I see that discussion is going in that direction, that we forget this black and white presence versus online. That's boring. It's about which content in which format. And it can be still very, very appropriate to have a good study booklet. It's a lot of work, and I love scholars who can do it. But it's also an art to produce very good videos, and the next is very good in arranging a learning environment like you do at the moment.
So this means, if I got it right, there is a mixture of content, didactics, technology, and social interaction. So there are at least four different elements. And if one is dominating, if we now get into a direction where everybody's crazy about technology, we might lose all the others.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's not just think before you choose a technology. It's what you want to reach. Yeah.
Okay, we will continue our discussion after the other two inputs. Now it's up to Oliver Vettori. He's a colleague of mine. He's dean at my university, and he will start his presentation now. I think we have to switch to his computer screen so that he can start his presentation, or do we start it?
I'm already sharing.
Ah, wonderful. Oh, and the picture of you. This is how it looks like when you're there.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Andre. Actually, when I was asked by Andrea and Barbara if I wanted to go second, I completely forgot how daunting it can be, to actually follow Ada Pellert. So that was a wonderfully comprehensive presentation. Thank you for that. And so many things that actually we could discuss and move on. Now, what I enjoyed about that very much also was that I guess, Ada, you would agree that a lot of the things they were touching upon, they were not so much reinforced just by the pandemic. So a lot of the considerations actually came before that. And that's actually one of the hypotheses my own presentation will be built upon. I guess when it comes to teaching and learning, a lot of the impact it's going to have on higher education right now is overrated. We will see a lot of impact on higher education, but I think in far less obvious ways and in far more subtle ways and in far different ways than people now expect, especially when we discuss the midterm and long term. So the focus today from my presentation will be a bit different. It's going to be focused on collaboration, taking the cue from the title of today's webinar, Co-Designing the University of the Future. And because it's also something that it kind of changed during the last couple of months, but in many ways it just changed the urgency it has. Collaboration was already at the heart of our considerations for the future of teaching and learning before the pandemic struck us all. And this is actually also, as Andrew just mentioned, it's another picture of VU. This is actually, and it looks very futuristic, but it also ties back to what many people would agree on is at the heart of teaching learning. People getting together, discussing, collaborating. And a lot of people in higher education are now actually missing that, saying we need back on campus. But it's also something, I think, sometimes it's a bit of a lie people keep telling themselves when it's about universities were always about this kind of collaboration. Yes, it was, but there were a lot of the types that Ada was showing about more input heavy lecture type things. So this whole idea of co-creating knowledge, of getting together, it's something that's becoming more and more important, and it's getting a bit of a spin through the new technologies, but it's not as high on our minds or as strong as our minds as we usually think it does. So some things never change. Yeah, that's still something that's important, but of course things do change because that's what collaboration looks like now. And it's not just induced by the pandemic. This is really what collaborations look for a lot of people working right now, and and has been looking for a long time in a globalized world. And that's why I do believe that collaboration is getting a bit of a new focus. It's getting a bit strengthened and reinforced, but not the way you would imagine it through the pandemic. It's because today's society is increasingly dealing with problems, with issues that are so complex that you need different actors. You need dozens, hundreds, thousands of people working together. Just take the pandemic as one example. I mean, it's half a miracle that the vaccines are out now, but it only worked because you had so many different actors with so much different knowledge working together, collaborating, finding ways to actually understand each other. And that's the same for issues. It's climate change, aging societies, whatever challenges are actually lying ahead of us or already, we're already in the middle of them. They require a different kind of working together. Knowledge, I mean, this is basically doable, reading all the books in this library within a reasonable amount of time. But even following the knowledge of your discipline is getting increasingly difficult. And people have more and more specialized and fragmented knowledge, and still they need to actually understand each other, work together, find some common ground. As I mentioned, it's increasingly getting globalized. So it's quite common. Yeah, it doesn't need to be the call center in India, the famous one. You have people in many companies, you have people working together across supply chains from so many different contexts in so many different countries. And this is also something that is severely changing why collaboration matters, why cooperation matters, and how we need to tackle it. And last but not least, also the link to digitalization, because it's the core of this webinar as well. This changes ways. And I'm not just talking about netiquette, so about, please mute yourself, and then everyone always forgets to unmute before they're speaking. I'm really talking, you have different, how do you even share files or information, or how do you, this requires so much different Also, knowledge or ways of organizing yourself without falling into other pitfalls. This is something quite serious at the moment. So at VU, and I think for a lot of universities, graduate attributes that focus on collaboration are becoming much more important. For us, for the next couple of years, collaboration is at the heart of the teaching and learning strategy, and it links into so many different areas. Why? We want our students, we want our graduates to be able to work in those teams. I've heard a lot of discourses when people were arguing, it's just working in teams. We can't expect them to lead teams on the undergraduate level. But what else would you do? If you have a team, someone needs to coordinate, someone needs to moderate. So these are all skills that people need and actually to work together. And I'm not just talking about teams of 5 or 6 people. How would you even enlarge that and work beyond that? Diversity, intercultural skills, understanding each other. Now, this is not new. And I saw that Wilfried Schneider is also in the webinar today. I'm expecting him to tell me later that most of what I'm telling people now is not new, but that's not what I'm getting it. It's becoming more and more important. You have so many different actors now and different backgrounds, different levels and scope of experience, and you need to integrate them and you need to be aware of that. You need skills in arguing things, yeah, in a peaceful way. And that's why I took the picture here from sports. You need to find, but for that, you also need a position. And I think sports is also symbolic for that. It's not just about arguing. I read an interesting essay on the UK elite a couple of months ago, how this whole focus on arguing for argument's sake and scoring and winning points is part of the problem that is ailing the leadership in the UK now. It's really about understanding where you come from and what you want to achieve through that argument. For that, you need listening skills. Maybe that's part of the problem of Boris Johnson et al., that you really need to listen to people and to get there. And last but not least, it's a matter of conflict, dealing with conflict resolution. Most people are far too afraid of conflicts. So what does that mean if I go into practice? Where do you see new modes of teaching and learning? Where is the link to digitalization? We will see a lot more need for interdisciplinary labs, interdisciplinary projects. If you see that now VU is entering a European university consortium, this is at the heart of all the teaching and learning programs, in the heart of the society interface, bringing people from different backgrounds, bringing people from outside the university. That's what co-designing actually means. And for that, you have to find ways. And that's changing didactics completely. You can't do that in a typical course format or lecture format. All the practical problems about that. How do you pay people coming from, what do you do about contractual issues? What do you do about the knowledge exchange there? How do you actually reward people for that? Also students, when they contribute in something where they're actually also part of the teachers. That's a very interesting challenge and something very fascinating. And it automatically links to my second point about mentoring is becoming more important. Yeah, there's different approaches, coaching, supervision, mentoring, but so is reverse mentoring. We're now entering a society, we're now entering an era where people with different backgrounds, also different levels of age, have different knowledge and different experience. That's what this picture symbolizes beautifully. You have two people, one of them sharing the wisdom of age and the other one explaining how technology works. You need that far more often, and that also reverses the roles of the teachers and learners in more ways than we usually expect them to. It changes things when it comes to international learning communities. And here's one of the more obvious links to digitalization, because this is changing also mobility and how you exchange those views. One of my favorite projects at VU at the moment is a course that is being taught by lecturers from 7 different universities with 140 students from those 7 different universities, some of them in Japan, in Singapore, and they're all within the same course. It's a mixture of asynchronous, but also simultaneous teaching and learning. They have to organize themselves. They're in project groups across that. You might have 4 students from 4 different institutions and a supervisor from a 5th institution, and they have to get together. They have to understand each other. And for them, the learning experience is not so much about the sustainable development goals, which is the focus of the course, but very much about learning to actually, how do you work with someone from Japan in a completely different time zone, when they have, and also completely different mindset, how do you get together there? Very fascinating. And I believe that's going to happen much more, induced by climate change, induced now by the pandemic, induced by digitalization, but also because people now need to learn how they will later work together in the real world, if we want to call it. Peer feedback. yeah, feedback has always been one of the weaker points, arguably, in higher education. Far too little feedback is coming apart from grades. But I do believe one of the future challenges lies in actually learners, and that's tied to the reversal of roles, in learners actually getting each other feedback. And for digitalization, that's particularly difficult because you don't have students getting together. You need to find peer review, peer feedback modes that work online as well, because sometimes people don't just unbuckle and let everything out, but you need rules for that. You need to learn how do you actually give someone a written feedback in a productive way, and that's changing as well. And the last two new modes, and I'm not expecting that to be a complete list. It was more about getting a discussion started. That probably is going to be the two most controversial things, because as Ada Pellert also said, some things only can happen on site, on campus. You cannot replace everything. So when we started a discussion on do we need an escape room for a new building, I thought, what a gimmicky idea. And then I started thinking about it. I'm not a big fan of escape rooms as such, but there's also these board games that work like one. And what I do like is observing how people organize themselves during this game, because you have 4 people, you have a time constraint, and they have to solve riddles together, and they might not even know what is the right approach. Someone has to actually set the pace. They have to agree on a solution, because otherwise, I don't know, the zombies are going to eat you, whatever's happening after that. So, and wherever would you actually get people to work like this? Yeah, facing a challenge under time constraints, if you don't find, it doesn't need to be an escape room, but if you don't find challenges, if you don't find didactic ways of actually going there. Now, arguably, it can be distant, the teacher doesn't need to be in the room, but this can only happen in a physical setting. This is something completely different. And I think that's something what we also need to be aware of when we talk about the future of digitalization in higher education, what works when and how. And I think that links beautifully to what Ada already said. And the other part is more completely in the technology direction. What we're pursuing right now is a big program focusing on immersive learning, augmented reality. So a lot of challenges you work through collaboration. You can learn through simulation, you can learn through augmented reality, through virtual reality, because role plays, as funny as they might be, are not always the most productive way of getting there. Someone really needs to know their role before they get there. I've seen so many bad role plays by students because they couldn't get into the role and they just had to act, which is not the same as actually being faced with someone who is able to boss you around. So this was it in a nutshell. Just a couple of ideas I want to share, totally different focus than with Ada Pellert, and I'm very happy to actually getting your questions and comments later. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Just a brief reminder, if you have any questions, any comments, please put them into the chat. We will then try to summarize them and to process them. Also, you were very well in time. So this gives me the opportunity to ask you 1 or 2 questions, Oliver, before we go to the next presentation. You talked about collaboration, co-creating. How far has VU come in co-creating lectures, classes together with the students? How far are they involved? Are they just the ones who are spoon-fed by the brilliant didactically trained masters of content, or do they create their own menu?
Well, if the question is how far have we come, I would say not nearly far enough, but there's some very, very interesting starts. Yeah? Mm-hmm. A couple of years ago, and this is not exactly where students are co-creating the content of the class, of course, but they're kind of taking other roles. A couple of years ago, one of our teachers got, in Austria, there's a national award, state prize for teaching, and they got it for a course where bachelor students and master's degree students are actually basically in the same class. And then you also have the teachers on both levels, and they work together towards certain projects. The master students learn something through supervising the bachelor degree students. The others are also kind of giving feedback to the master degree students from a certain perspective. So this whole collaboration beyond what you traditionally see as group work after group work after group work, that's actually taking flight. And this was one example. We have several of them. In terms of really understanding of co-creators, apart from research labs, we're still not there yet. And that's why we also strongly incentivize those things. But if I may, Andre, what we see as an even bigger challenge at the moment is not just bringing students into that role, but we still have too few teachers who actually group together and approach teaching a class together. Some of the reasons for that are logistical, some of them are financial ones, some of them are very bureaucratic ones. We've been working on that. We've created what we call a team teaching label, making it easier for teachers to get together, because it's then not that you just put the teaching workload into half, you give them a bit more for what they're doing as a collaboration. And these are all incentives that you have to think about if you want to bring people together.
My second question refers to the pictures that you showed. I'm not 100% sure, but I didn't see any kind of Audimax class. I saw a lot of people in the grass and on the computer. So the visuals that you used are totally different to the visual you have behind you, because this is where our teaching, well, it's the learning center and the teaching center, and the teaching center, there's the Audimax. Do we need it anymore? Shouldn't we simply lock it down and replace it by videos? Because you can't do interactive teaching with 800 students. And all that you talked about is not about teaching 800 students. So why do we need it anymore?
Yeah, well, the obvious answer is what I was talking about is part of the picture and it's not the entirety. So I was not talking about the entirety of teaching and learning and what is effective in what way. And I'm actually a very strong believer in the power of lectures if they're well made. And we have a couple of excellent teachers who can reach 600 students and can get an interactive vibe in the auditorium maximum, and you cannot replace that through videos or online lectures. So we definitely need that. It's just a different function and different effect. And I think one of the things that collaboration requires, and it leads back to what I was talking about knowledge, you have to know what you talk about before you start talking about it. And I think this is still one of the challenges. How do we actually bring students? Personally, I do believe it's part of the problem of the US model, where you start with arguing a point before you have actually understood the point, because you're so much focusing on argumentation skills and everything. You need to know where you come from. And I think that's also one of the big challenges for interdisciplinary teaching and collaboration and everything. Where do you start? By disciplinary knowledge? Can you start in an interdisciplinary way without even understanding one of the disciplines? I think that's a big issue.
Thank you. We will continue this discussion after our third input. Our third input presentation is from Pietro Micheli from Warwick Business School. Pietro, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much, Andre, and thanks very much, Barbara, for inviting me. I hope you can hear me okay. Everybody okay with that? So what I'm going to do, similar to the previous presenters, I'm going to share my screen. So you should be able to see my slides. There are not that many. I'm just going to talk more about something practical that we've done at the University of Warwick, specifically in the business school where I work. I'm Pietro Micheli. I'm a professor at the University of Warwick Business School. My areas of interest are around innovation, operations, and strategy. So that's where I'm situated. I tend to speak about the subjects that I do work in. In this occasion, I have the opportunity to speak about something else, in the sense that I'm the director of the Distance Learning MBA. So it's a large program, which I'll explain in a second. We are happy with our rankings, and in a way, the COVID has had, as one of the very few positive outcomes of COVID has been that there's been quite a lot of more interest in MBA programs that are blended, as we call them. So Distance Learning will be one. So what I like to do is to really give you a little bit of an overview of what we've done at Warwick in the business school specifically. And then I'll talk about what we've done, again, over the past year or so in relation to the Distance Learning MBA program. So in a sense, I'm going to pull some of the threads that, of course, my previous speakers have discussed around digitalization and around collaboration between students and faculty and so on. And I'm just going to give you our own experience. This is not intended to be some kind of best practice in any way. It's just an illustration. So take it as such, please. Let me just give an introduction. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the University of Warwick. It's in the UK. It's in the area in the middle, so-called the Midlands, obviously. This is a picture of our the center of campus. So it's a campus-based university. And there used to be a lot of students. At the moment, there's virtually no one because we're in lockdown. Actually, I come to the office, but I'm one of the very few people that has got access. And this is one of the large teaching centers that we built quite recently that's used by different departments. Warwick is a generalist university. So we have, from medicine to philosophy, physics, engineering, business, and so on. The business school is the largest department, but there's 28. So the business school is this. This is one of the images. Not a wintry one. Today is mainly gray with lots of snow, so quite a different scenery. And as a business school, we also have what we call a campus, which I think is a bit exaggerated. So we have 2 floors of a skyscraper in London called the Shard. If you've been to London recently, it's become quite iconic as a building. And so that's the way it looks. We typically teach MBA students, so postgraduate students that are typically working, and executive education and other various programs. So that's what we do over there. What I like to talk about, and that's what I discussed before with the organizers, is just really to give you an idea of what the COVID-19 effect has been on us. The distance learning program, as I'll describe it in a second, was already to a good extent, about 75% online and then 25% in presence. But a lot of the other programs were not. They were typical university programs, by and large residential. So undergraduate, MSc, so pre-experience, postgraduate, and so on, PhD, DBA, so various other degrees were all in presence. And so just to give you an overview, I've asked the program team to just pull together a bit of some figures just to give you an idea. So just to give you a sense of how much we had to invest in online resources that we didn't have before. And again, particularly undergraduate and postgraduate, but postgraduate pre-experience, in the period between 23rd of March 2019, so 2 years ago, to 21st of January 2020, we had created as a school, only the business school, 436 sessions that would be at least 30 minutes long. In the same period, but of course a year after, that number had gone up to 7,272. So a massive investment that we've had to make because, of course, in the UK, as much as in many other countries, we've had a lot of remote teaching. And to some extent, we really had to create this stuff in a kind of an emergency mode. So quite a lot of investment in doing so, and quite a few people involved in doing that. Just to give you an idea, so the asynchronous content that we had before in the programs that were not MBA were 0, because it was all either synchronous online or synchronous in presence. In that period, again, was over 3,000 videos. So again, quite a large investment in that as well. Just a couple of things reflecting on what we've had to do, not just the size of this that I'm trying to give you as an idea, but also, we had a training program that we created to try to really get students and faculty and support teams and so on to really be more up to speed with what an online delivery would entail. So we had a way to, what we call the WS Live session is basically a webinar that is supported by a platform that we develop ourselves. So we have a portal called MyWS. And so we've had 74 people taking this kind of this program to be more up to speed to how to generate and teach with a certain approach that was not the typical of the work they used to. We created a model called 1+1+1, especially for undergraduates and to some MSc courses. So the 1+1+1 refers to 1 hour of asynchronous content, so prepared in advance. And now, of course, we've got a longer lead time. So we've managed to create this with a bit of time. Before it was really in a kind of emergency mode. We then had the second one is a synchronous lecture, which of course now it's online. And then the third one is a synchronous seminar. So the difference between a lecture and a seminar in our jargon is that the lecture is to the whole cohort. So say 120 students, and seminars are groups of up to 30 students. Again, normally they would have been in presence, now they're online. And they tend to be more applied. So in a business school case, we'll be working on a case study, doing a simulation and so on and so forth. And then also we've had, quite a lot of training to faculty and the program team on how to run this live session. So quite a large group of people. And we've also created a bank of content that has been viewed many, many times, again, by faculty and members of professional service teams. So this has been quite a big investment for us. I'm not saying that this has been perfect at all, but we certainly now feel a bit more confident, especially when we have to create new content and how to deliver it and so on. Some faculty would have been used to that, others were not. And so this has been quite a big, steep learning curve, as the English would say. If I speak a bit about the program that I know better, so the one that I'm course director of, this is called the Distance Learning MBA. It's something that the University of Warwick has had for a long, long time, probably about 35, 40 years. You can imagine that in the 80s, there was no platform and internet and so on. So it used to be a distance learning in the sense that you would live in Austria or in Thailand or in Peru, and you would receive from the University of Warwick a parcel with books and essays, and then you would sit exams at centers that would be controlled by examiners and so on and so forth. Now, of course, it's a completely different story. But one thing that has remained constant over the past, certainly the past decade, probably more, is the fact that we've always tried to blend online, because that's really the core of the program, but also with in-presence elements. So if you are a student with us, you would do about 70%, 75% of modules and content online, but then you would have 2 residential weeks that are compulsory, one at the beginning of year 1, one at the beginning of year 2. This is a 2-year program. Part-time for people that tend to be working full-time. And then you would also have modules that you can choose to do residentially. Sometimes in the UK, sometimes you could do them in other countries. Just to give an idea of size, this is quite a large program. At the moment, I was checking numbers. I think it's just slightly over 1,300 students. So it's quite a big program. Of course, not all enrolled at the same time. So this is over 2 years, plus students that have enrolled, but have asked for extensions and so on. So every year we get roughly 500 students, 200 registered at Warwick in one intake, and then double, so 400 at Warwick, and then 120 or so in London. If you do this, it will be some modules and then a dissertation. So a typical master program, again, spread over the 2 years. Now, just to give you again an idea of the type of people we're talking about, and then I'll reflect on digitization and also collaboration. So trying to link also with the previous 2 talks. Just to give you an idea, I've picked the last cohort that has enrolled, so the January 2021. So right now, they started 2 weeks ago, and it's 209 students of 51 nationalities, so very diverse. And it's not just the nationality, but also where people live. We really have every continent represented in every cohort. So quite a very big spread, also in terms of time zones, which creates problems. I come back to that if you want me to. But essentially now we've had to double up webinars more, because we need to cater for people from the Far East to people living in Vancouver. So quite, again, diverse. So we had to stream and create more content and so on and so forth. So that has kind of also pushed us to do more in the sense of creating and delivering content. And it's also people that are very diverse in terms of, the sectors they work in, the areas that they work in. And, typically the split male-female is about 70-30, which, is fairly good. If you think about in the past, it used to be 90-10 male-female, at least for us. So my last slide, I don't want to overrun, is very much about reflections on something that we've already discussed to some extent, which is, what shall we do? What is the content that we should deliver in a synchronous way? What is in an asynchronous way? What shall we do online versus what shall we do in presence and so on? So one of the things that we thought about at the beginning of the pandemic was maybe, this is the end of the blended program. And essentially what we want to do, it's only something that is unrelated to, online education. So this is it. Maybe we don't need a residential element. It's not possible at the moment. We've had to cancel it and run those weeks online. So why not run everything online? And that was a big no that came from the students. Absolutely not. So the students love the fact of coming to campus, whether it's in Warwick or in London, love the fact of having some personal interaction also in other modules that they could choose. And so the blended element was definitely reinforced over and over again. So we're certainly not going in the direction of going fully online. At the same time, of course, what this has also got us to reflect on, even though this program has gone on for a while, we probably have not been as intentional as we should have been in deciding what kind of content suits, is best fit in terms of type of delivery, type of engagement with students. And so, for example, now we've been a lot clearer to the module leaders, the tutors, because we have this model. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the program, but we have teachers, module leaders, and tutors. We have different figures, if you want. And so we've come up with guidelines that are much clearer about, what is content that is most suitable in certain ways, certain mediums of delivery. We've instituted a quality control process within the program team and the teaching and learning team. So we have two teams that do the administrative, if you want to support side of the program. So again, that's very clear now. It was not as much as in the past. Now we have basically a pipeline. If you work in management, it's like a stage gate. And then the other thing that we've done is very much around, when we will be able to go back to residential weeks. So hopefully from June onwards, we'll see what happens. It's very much about, again, let's try to use the in-presence moments in a much more intentional way. So for example, in the past, we used to have module content being delivered, obviously not full modules, because not in a week you couldn't do it, but some bits of module delivery. We're scrapping that unless it's really necessary. Examinations, we're moving away from them. And if we will keep them using a mechanism called Proctorio, a company called Proctorio. So we can do them online. We don't have to have people in presence. But what we're going to do is a lot more, the co-curricular material, if you want, and opportunities. So a lot more about networking. These are people whose age is roughly, I would say probably about 3/4 are in the bracket 35 to 45 years of age. So a lot more around network opportunities. Many of the people that do the MBA with us want to change jobs or be promoted in what they do, so they're really kind of career focused a lot. We have coaching activities that we used to do in part online, but now we want to try and do them as much as possible in person. We want to have events like inviting industry speakers. We've now created an MBA conference that we're going to run when we can in the building that I've got in front of me out of the window here. Now again, it doesn't look as nice as this because it's all covered in snow, but the idea is to really be much more intentional. So just to wrap up, the learning points for us have been many. As a business school, we've had to invest a lot in the creation of material. We have quite a large team of people that help us do that, and it's all in-house, both the software developers, but also the people that check the videos, record the videos, and so on. So it's an internal resource, but we've had to recruit some people because we just couldn't handle the volumes. And in relation to the program that I direct, so we've had quite a few changes, but not on the side of let's go more online because that's where we're going, but more about being intentional in this kind of blended learning kind of setup that we have. So I think this is it. I've tried to stick to my 15 minutes. I hope this was interesting as an illustration. I don't have any, I certainly don't want to show this as the right way to do it. We've made mistakes over time, but we're certainly in a much better place now than we used to be in March 2020. All right, so I'm going to stop screen sharing and yeah, very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Very interesting insights to, well, there was one question from Kate. What is the magic sauce that put you on top of my Financial Times list?
The magic sauce, I think it's 40 years of work. I don't know the magic sauce, but yeah, no, it's a long time. We've been at it for a long time. And some of the things that, so for example, I was speaking to colleagues outside of our university, and they also now want, of course, to create programs of this kind. And I have to say that it's for them. Again, I'm talking about business school more than universities in general. It's quite a daunting task. If I think about the amount of investment that has happened in this place for such a long time, starting from scratch is like a big wall. So it's quite a lot of work. The internal capabilities that this place has developed over 40 years, it's not something you create overnight. So I don't know if that's the magic sauce. Other things will be, if you look at rankings, we can go on for a bit, but we try to really look at those as well. So for example, if we look at mix of students, we've now hit a really good point, we think, in terms of diversity, in terms of countries, nationalities, to some extent, job roles, to some extent, diversity in terms of gender diversity. Certainly it was not as good before. So, that's what we're trying to do. And it's a very large program. I mean, 1,300 students, it's a lot. So yeah, the more you have, the more come in.
Okay. Let's ask Ada Pellert the same question. Is there any magic sauce at your university that helps you to deal with this challenge? And you unmute yourself.
We have a completely different business model. We are an open university, so everybody can decide on a Sunday evening, tomorrow I start a study program, which is, means also that you find out, oh, life is more busy than I thought, and you don't finish, but at least you can have, and I underline that because it's not, in Germany you have these numerous clauses. So let's take, for instance, psychology. A lot of people want to study psychology, but they must have the best grades in school, 1.0. So not many can fulfill this wish. We have no numerous clauses, so 13,000 people study psychology with us. And I can say we have so super good graduates. Because they are different. They have a lot of life experience. Yeah, they don't know less about the content, but they have so much more. And I think that's kind of why the employers love our graduates, because they have this mixture of different competencies. And it's really hard to accomplish a distance study program while you are busy with your family, your profession, and so on. And I think that's kind of what makes them special.
Okay. I carefully observed the chat box, and thank you very much for already starting and kickstarting our discussion. It's a very diverse discussion, and some of the side discussions already were questions and answers that were already answered. So we have now different levels. I tried to sort it out, and as far as I could, I think there are 3 levels at least that we can discuss. We can discuss on a macro level. What's the role of the university of the future? Did the purpose change? Did the strategy change? Did the unique proposition change? So is there a change in the strategy, purpose, role of universities? That's one level. The second one, I got the impression, is rather a meso level, to talk about infrastructure, places, procedures, organizations, criteria. So this is rather a meso level. How do we organize our universities, and did something change in here? And then there are a lot of questions on the microstructure, saying about what about didactics, what about skills, what about courses, what about programs? So that's the most fine granular element. What about assessments? And I think we could talk about this for days. So let's start and try to go through these 3 levels. Did anything change, or will anything change regarding the purpose, the strategy of your organization because of COVID? Or will the strategy and the purpose will be the same as it was 2 years before in 5 years from now? So did it shake up your unique proposition? Or will it be the same, Oliver?
That's always a difficult question with so many VU colleagues also in the audience. Starting first, I would say universities and strategy, you could discuss it for a very long time. Personally, I doubt that most universities actually have a real strategy. But and having that said, that because it's very often a wish list compiled of different ideas and where to pursue, and they all look very similar. It's not necessarily a strategy as you would understand in other contexts. But will it change through the pandemic? I think it needs. Strategies change, in a way all the time. You put different things on. Will the mission change because of that? I think that's too global a question. For some universities, it will. I remember when we had some preparatory talks, when we were already discussing that. I do believe some universities in more rural areas they might change their mission, they might change their focus. Through distance education, they might want to enter new markets, they might want to target new audiences, because for them it's a big opportunity. For the big campus universities, I don't think it's going to change that much, at least not on the most obvious level. I will we heard resilience today. They're very resilient. I'll see a backlash, and I would wager a lot of money on it. that the biggest universities are going back to mostly campus teaching, and after the pandemic, not caring that much about this intermezzo in a way. But for other types of institutions globally in other countries, I think it's changing a lot. In Asia, it's changing how digitalization is actually getting a real push forward, where universities didn't have any equipment before, and that's a big game changer.
Okay. Ada, will COVID change the purpose, the strategy of your university? Is there a different position now to be expected in a few years from now? Or is it just a different technology? It will stay the same.
It's of course it's challenging our positioning, because the others are now also experimenting with new forms of learning and more blended. And I think it makes us think more about, is it really only the study model, or what makes the difference with FernUniversität? And I would say no. The study model is only a means to get to a learner that is non-traditional still for the higher education system in a way. We are the lifelong learning university, and it's more about that and not about being digital or blended. I think, and we have to be very clear about that positioning, because in our case, they're studying a lot of people mid-career and coming from very different backgrounds, a very open university, and I think that is our challenge. And of course, you're right, we have to focus on that and to bring that mission. If we only would say it's the study model, then I think it would be more dangerous.
Because I think when we think of what Oliver said, well, the big universities with a campus, at least they have the infrastructure. They can say, if you want to experience this infrastructure, come here. If you want to experience a nice course, you could also register to masterclass. It's nicer, and they'll have the bigger names. So you can relax, and then you can listen to them. So there must be something in between to say, this is what we have and the others don't. So
but
that's the...
I really think, I mean, I was myself a student at Wirtschaftsuniversität Wien, and I think, of course, being 18, 19, 20-year-old, the campus, to be on site with others is so extremely important. I mean, there is much about meeting others of your age, getting in a certain way socialized. So that will stay. And I think, but if we move on to different stages of life, maybe that aspect is not that important anymore. So when I have a student, 35-year-old in a profession, says, hey, I want to really think how you spend my precious time. I can't spend ages on your nice campus, but be precise. So I think you have to think more about your target group. And I really hope, I mean, I remember nearly 35 years ago, 8 o'clock in the morning, we put in an Audimax at Wirtschaftsuniversität 800 people. And I don't think that a lot of personality development just evolved. So maybe we think more how to make this really an event if we meet there. That is an event, but we have to do something about it.
Pietro, was there any change, or will there be any change in strategy of Warwick Business School because of this experience of the last year and potentially the next half year?
I mean, to some extent, certain things are just going to progress probably a bit faster. So again, the blended learning that we have quite strongly on the MBA, we're probably going to roll out to the MSc programs. Again, from what Ada was saying, demographically, the undergraduate is probably a bit less so, but certainly the MSc MBA courses for sure. Executive education, even more so. So that's probably the one that we really have to boost quite a bit with the online offering. And then the other one, as I said, yeah, it's that kind of being very intentional and much clearer about which mechanisms media you use and for whom. And in the past, yeah, of course, we had an idea of that, but now it's certainly a lot clearer. And people just have to face it. You know, now undergraduate teaching is in that kind of 1+1+1 model. And even if the people came back, they will still, at least for now, go through a blended program. So that will give us quite a lot of learning. We'll see what happens. The last thing that I want to say is, the other thing that has brought us home, even though we are a campus, is that, you know, in the future, we don't have to build anything. That's the thing that probably most of us have realized at the moment, especially if you're a business school. If you have labs of chemistry, that's a different story. But if you're a business school, you don't have to own a place necessarily. So that's hopefully where we're going to go.
Mm-hmm. So now you touch upon my meso level, which is infrastructure, to say, okay, which infrastructure do we have? Which infrastructure do we need? Infrastructure sometimes is not just the physical infrastructure, it's also the knowledge base. Is there any knowledge base that we need now for the future smart post-COVID university that we lack? Is there anything where you say, okay, but this is something we really need for being future-proof that now you found out? Is there anything lacking? Pietro,
Sure. I would say that to use management jargon, the user experience needs to be boosted, and our internal capability, which we have invested over the years. So it's all pretty much everything that we do is in-house, which is not the same as other business schools that I know. So it's fairly rare. But the thing that has brought us home is that we do want to boost it. We definitely don't want to outsource it, but we want to get that even more. So, students are now, when they look at our platform that we use, in the past it was, wow, I mean, you have your own thing. And now is, look, this is not the same as Spotify. This is not the same as Facebook. This is not the same as Pinterest. Come on, get your act together. So that's definitely something that we have to do a lot more of, yes.
Mm-hmm. Oliver, which kind of skills, which kind of infrastructure do we need for our future university, our smarter university?
I'll try to be brief this time. I think we focus too much on infrastructure. We have this beautiful campus, and I think most of the people who helped build it would agree 7-8 years later, we would already build a lot of the things different. But that means, but this is constantly catching up with mode. So I think ultimately it's really about what teachers and students create together in terms of, the structure of the course, not so much the infrastructure in which it is founded, but about the knowledge. This is almost a philosophical question. There's some great research out there. How do you actually get research knowledge codified into what we teach? And sometimes this takes for ages. That's why some of the textbooks are already a bit outdated. So I think what we would need is actually accelerating some of these processes, making sure that actually what is taught is really more infused by research, and not kidding ourselves that someone talking about his or her research project is already doing research-led teaching. That's something entirely different that has more to do with textbook and learning materials than with explaining what you did in your own paper.
Mm-hmm. Seems to be as if teaching would be a spin-off of research. Is teaching sometimes also inspired by collaborating with companies? So is it just trickling down higher knowledge from your research, and then you'd tell the students what you did in the morning in your research? So is this the way of the supply chain, or is there also supply chain from practice? And how is this organized? Or could it be organized?
I think there's, thank you for the question, Andre. I think there's a misconception that indeed is in most heads that it trickles down. But that's why I don't like the expression research-led teaching. It should actually be learning through research. So what we want is an inquisitive mind. We want students to understand what this process is about. How do you explain it? And you can do that in a lot of contexts and involving practitioners. But it's not about imparting experience or knowledge. You need to experience some things yourself with the help of those people. And I think this needs to change, this model of knowledge trickling down.
Okay. And if we now come down to the level of the micro level, and there we could really talk for ages about course design, didactics, gamification, assessment. That's a big thing. There was several questions around what would be a good ratio between online and presence education, or does this really depend on the topic and in the organization? Is that not the best mix? But if everything is about online, if you're just watching a series of videos, if it's live or if it's even not live, what's then the difference to masterclass, to whatever, watching YouTube videos and getting a degree at the end? So what would be a good ratio? Oliver, what would you say?
My answer would be that very much depends. But again, a very good question, Andre, because it also puts the focus on this all or nothing approach. I do believe it needs to be a mixture, it needs to be combined. I think Ada very much argued in the same direction. You're not replacing an entire lecture through a video. You can enhance it through some inputs with experts you would normally not be able to have in your lecture, but that's different. And so we shouldn't think about replacing entire courses or designs. It's really about how do you mix those didactic elements.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then there was one more question about the informal. So how far do we go in formalizing things, and what's the role of the informal? Pietro, perhaps a question to you. And how do you ensure that there is a kind of unexpected thing, so that you get something that was not part of the syllabus and the curriculum and the learning objectives, the spontaneous element, the informal element? How can we safeguard this?
Yeah, I think that's right, and that goes back also to the other question about what is the balance between online and not. And just one thing to say, when we think about what kind of medium is used and for what material, of course it depends on context, so what you're teaching, but also it needs to be seen as a thread. So for example, having a sequence of 10 videos completely asynchronous, that's not great in general, whatever topic you're teaching, from accounting to whatever else. So that's wrong. You need to see the experience of the student. And if the student has a bit of a mixture, that has to be done intentionally. And that also means that when you think about that, there will be certain things that are intentional and planned, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you record the video, that's what it is. People may have a forum to discuss, which we do offer, but it's nothing like, bumping into somebody next to the coffee machine. It's not the same thing. And that's why for us, when students have commented over and over again that they don't want to let go of the residential element, even though I'm talking about this as a distance learning program, that was one of the things that they were referring to, which is, I bump into somebody and maybe they have a vacancy in their company. We've had examples of people that have been recruited by fellow students on the MBA because they meet, right? You couldn't plan for that. You can't do it. So that kind of serendipitous element, if you want, you need to preserve. But doing that online, certainly asynchronously, no chance. That has to be done in a different way. We have experimented now that we have to be online with some kind of forum. It's not speed dating, but it's like mixing people, and it's not the same as being in the same place. So that's one of the reasons why we want to keep the blend.
Mm-hmm. Ada, the same question to you. You have a long experience in asynchronous and well-prepared teaching materials. What's the right balance between synchronous and live? Is there a need for this live experience, and what's the right balance?
Of course, but I think mainly it is a link to the outcome or goal. Yeah, so it depends. If you want to become a veterinarian, that has to be looked different, like a philosopher. So that's the first. But what is on my mind, and it links to some questions in the chat, is my big vision would that we really, I want blend it with the third pillar of meeting in presence, but then something special has to happen there. I think all the creativity, also the unintended, somebody wrote about non-intentional learning. I think that's very important. And we really have to create learning spaces where this can happen. And my vision is let the content be online, individualized. You can read a book wherever you want to. And then you will link to others. That's the collaboration. You can apply it to a context. And that can also be online. But then if you meet in person, and that's the third pillar, there's something special should happen, because time is the most precious resource. And I think what we all miss now is, where is brainstorming, creativity, the unintentional, the informal happening? That is also applying to our working life, but I think also good educational life needs that. And that would be my vision, that in every study program, there's space for that, at least in every program in higher education, because that's the specific.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It seems a little bit, I got the impression that we could rather differentiate between content and coaching. Mm-hmm. And content is what we have a lot, much more than we have time, much more than students might have time to digest. We can flood them with content, but on the other hand, they need coaches. They need someone to help them. And perhaps content is something which doubles every 4 or 5 years. And content is something that we really focus on. Perhaps we should focus more on coaching, how to deliver that content. One last round question to all of you, just a visionary question of user experience. How will how will the university, your university, look like in 2030? From the view of one of your students, what will be different to today? What will be the most important difference that you would say if a student came to your university, let's say in 2010, and then and there's another one coming in 2030, so in a few years from now, what would be the main difference? Let's start with you, Ada.
I mean, it's a vision and a big
Yep.
wish. I would so much hope that the student would have a different position, that we really take user or student experience serious, and that the student is the co-creator of the programs, especially in our case, when they are experienced professionals. Why don't we use that more? And I really hope we can turn that into a driving force, so that a student and an alumni has the impression, oh yes, I can co-create this institution.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Oliver, how will the EU look like differently from the user experience side in 2030?
Well, my personal opinion is 10 years is not enough for universities to change that much. So at least in most cases. So I believe the scope would need to be a bit different. But on one hand, I would go with Ada. I think that was a perfect answer in many ways. On the other thing, I also hope that students would take that responsibility a bit more. So we're not making it easy for them, but it's one of the things that, it's really a codependent system. We have so many teachers who like to impart knowledge, but we also have so many students who don't believe themselves learners. They want to come there and consume that knowledge. And in order to co-create, we need a different understanding of the role. And now tying back to your coaching question, maybe we need to focus more about preparing them for that. And we hardly do that at the beginning of their studies.
Mm-hmm. So this means we flood them with content, and later on we hope they develop the right skills, and later on we help them and we give them feedback. But if you would change it the other way around, first semester, how to learn, how to organize your own learning experience, and then to give them access to all the content, that would be a nice vision. Okay. Pietro, your vision for 2030.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at risk of repeating what the other two speakers have said. Maybe just to add one thing is that, well, certainly for MBA students and possibly also for others, they don't have to be here. Okay, so in some cases they will be here, but at the moment, a lot of students, except the pandemic and the lockdown, but in general would be here, they wouldn't have to. And we wouldn't have to build, that's the thing. So it's not that we have to buy or build somewhere in California that will cost us a fortune. No, we don't have to, but we can run programs from there as much as in Singapore or anywhere else. So that's really what I think it might be happening, which is some universities are going to internationalize in that sense. And maybe in 10 years time, that's what we will have. Yeah, otherwise, yes, absolutely. It's very much about the journey of the learner that the others have mentioned.
Thank you. There are just 5 minutes left, and I would like to take these 5 minutes for two things. First of all, three things. First of all, I like to thank the three of you for these very, very interesting presentations and the inspiring discussion. Second, I would like to ask our audience we would like to know what you would like to see in our next webinar. Is there anything you would like to see? So please use this chat box right now just to drop us a message. What could be topics that you would like to see during the next month being dealt with in our webinar series? Actually, that's the 5th one, and we're a little bit running out of topics because we think we covered so many things that we need your demand. So if we would like to design something that fits to your expectation, that meets your needs, you have to tell us. So that's the right moment now to write it into the chat. While you're thinking about that, a brief advertisement of what we plan to do during the next 2 weeks. So this is with slides that we prepared. So next one, please. If you want to continue the discussion on this webinar, there is a discussion forum that will be live for the next week. So if you would like to continue discussing with us, continue discussing with our 3 experts, this is where you could do this in an asynchronous way. So just go to this website that you already know, livinginnovation.net, register and follow this link, and then you can continue this discussion in an asynchronous way. Or you can comment it here, as Barbara now put it, a link into the chat box. Then there will be, next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. And there will be another event. You might be interested in this. This is a little bit broader scope. This is about remote working, so not just remote teaching and remote learning, it's remote everything. We now are in home office, home whatever, and there are certain challenges. And trust surveillance and artificial intelligence is such a challenge in a context of teaching and learning, but also in a business context. And we will have an online dialogue on February 9th on trust surveillance and AI. So if you're interested in this, we have three brilliant speakers: Harald Katzmeier, who's founder and director of a network-oriented research institute. He will talk about trust in networks. Then we have Kirsi Maria Blomqvist, who's professor at Lappeenranta University in Finland. She worked for more than 20 years on the issue of trust and how we can build up trust and how we can maintain trust, even if we sit at home and we cannot talk to each other in an informal way. And we will have Harald Leitenmüller, who's Chief Technology Officer of Microsoft Austria. He will talk about the challenges and the benefits of artificial intelligence in remote working. So if you're more into this technology things, into trust and into surveillance, this might be the next opportunity to meet us and to meet our friends and partners and colleagues. So this is what you can expect. There was the question about recording. Yes, there are some recordings of this and the previous webinars. You already dropped some ideas. If you would like to continue dropping ideas for our next webinars, please do so. You can drop them here. We're still online for a few minutes. You can drop them at livinginnovation.net. And thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much to our speakers. And we can have an informal chat if you like to. Still for a few minutes, you can stay. You could also switch on your camera and your microphone if you would like to make use of this opportunity right now. We do not need to share the screen anymore. Thank you, Heike. We can simply have, as far as we can, as good as we can.